The crystal towers of Prime reached up toward a purple sky. 3 suns hung above the alien world, casting long shadows across the grand city below. This was the heart of the Galactic Concord, the alliance of 17 species that had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Ambassador stood at the window of her small quarters and looked out at the alien city. She was 42 years old, with dark hair turning gray at the temples and eyes that had seen too much. In 3 hours, she would stand before the Grand Assembly and speak for all of humanity. The thought made her stomach turn. Humanity had only been traveling among the stars for 300 years. They had built colonies on distant worlds. They had created ships that could cross the void between stars. They had believed they were alone in the universe. They were wrong. The first contact had happened 18 months ago. A Concord patrol ship had found a small human colony vessel drifting near the edge of explored space. The aliens had been watching humanity ever since, studying them like scientists study insects under glass. Now, the Concord had summoned humanity to answer for its intrusion into galactic territory. Turned away from the window, her aide, a young man named Tors, stood by the door with a tablet in his hands. "The assembly is ready for you, Ambassador," he said. His voice was steady, but she could see the fear in his eyes. "What do our people back home say?" she asked. Tors hesitated. "They say to be careful, to agree to whatever terms they offer. We cannot fight these beings, Ambassador. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours." Nodded slowly. She had seen the Concord warships in orbit. Each one was larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their weapons could crack planets. Their shields could stop nuclear explosions. Against such power, Earth's tiny fleet was nothing more than toys. "Let us go meet our new masters," she said. The Grand Assembly Chamber was the largest enclosed space had ever seen. It rose up like a cathedral, with thousands of seats arranged in circular tiers around a central platform. Every seat was filled with alien delegates. Some were tall and thin, with skin like blue ice. Others were short and covered in thick fur. Some had too many eyes. Some had no eyes at all. They all watched as walked down the long ramp to the speaker's platform. The silence was heavy, pressing down on her like a physical weight. At the highest tier sat the Council of Arbiters, the 17 rulers of the Concord. At their center was High Arbiter Iran, a creature that looked like a giant insect wrapped in flowing silk robes. His compound eyes reflected the light of 1,000 screens, and his mandibles clicked softly as he studied the human woman below. "You stand before the Galactic Concord," Iran said. His voice was translated through speakers that made his words sound flat and mechanical. "You speak for the species called humanity. Is this correct?" "It is," said. Her own voice echoed through the vast chamber. "Your kind has spread across 17 star systems without permission. You have harvested resources that belong to the Concord. You have violated our borders and broken our laws." Iran leaned forward. "What do you say in your defense?" Took a breath. "We did not know these territories belonged to anyone. We came in peace, seeking only to explore and survive. We meant no offense to the Concord or its member species." A sound rippled through the chamber. It took a moment to realize what it was. Laughter. Thousands of aliens were laughing at her. The sound was strange and horrible, a mix of clicks and whistles and deep rumbling growls. Iran raised one of his 4 arms, and the chamber fell silent. "You meant no offense," he repeated. "How amusing. The insect does not mean to offend when it crawls across our food. The bacteria does not mean to offend when it infects our bodies. And yet, we destroy them all the same." Felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. She forced them to relax. "The Concord has debated your fate," Iran continued. "Some among us argued for your complete destruction. Your species is primitive and violent. You have spent your entire history killing each other over territory and resources. You are, in the judgment of many here, a danger to galactic peace. He paused and felt her heart pounding in her chest. However, Oran said, we are not without mercy. The Conquered has decided to allow humanity to survive under the following terms. A holographic display appeared in the air before. She read the terms quickly, and each one felt like a knife in her gut. Humanity would be confined to a single star system, the 442 cluster, on the far edge of the galaxy, a barren place with few resources and no habitable worlds. They would not be allowed to expand beyond this territory. They would not be allowed to build military vessels larger than patrol craft. They would pay an annual tribute of rare minerals to the Conquered. Any violation of these terms would result in the complete destruction of the human species. These terms are not negotiable, Oran said. You will accept them or you will be erased from existence. The choice is yours. The chamber was silent. Every alien eye was fixed on the small human woman standing alone on the platform below. Wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. She wanted to tell these arrogant creatures exactly what she thought of them and their terms. But she thought of Earth. She thought of the colonies. She thought of the 8 billion people whose lives depended on what she said next. On behalf of humanity, she said quietly, I accept these terms. The laughter returned, louder than before. Oran's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. A wise decision, he said. You are children playing at civilization, little human. Be grateful that we do not simply erase your species as a footnote in galactic history. Now go, return to your corner of the galaxy and trouble us no more. Turned and walked back up the ramp. She did not look at the laughing aliens around her. She did not show any emotion on her face. She simply walked, one step after another, until she reached the exit. Tors was waiting for her outside. Ambassador, I am so sorry. This is a dark day for humanity. Said nothing, she simply kept walking. But Tors noticed something strange. For just a moment, as the ambassador passed through a shaft of purple sunlight, he thought he saw her smile. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret. The smile of someone who had just begun to play a very long game. What Tors did not know, what the Conquered did not know, was that humanity had detected their surveillance drones decades ago. The ships the aliens had observed were decoys. The weapons were fakes. Earth had been preparing for this moment for 30 years. The real fleet was hidden in the dark spaces between stars, growing, building, waiting. And it would keep waiting for as long as it took. 50 years had passed since the day of shame on Prime. Humanity had done exactly what the Conquered demanded. They retreated to the 442 system. They built their colonies on cold, harsh worlds with thin air and rocky soil. They paid their tribute every year without complaint. They bowed their heads when Conquered inspectors came to count their ships and check their weapons. To the galaxy, humanity was a broken species, a footnote, a joke that the elder races told when they wanted to laugh. But jokes do not build secret shipyards in the darkness between stars. Jokes do not develop weapons that the Conquered has never seen. Jokes do not wait 50 years for the right moment to strike. Commander sat in the captain's chair of the HSS Persistent, a small patrol vessel assigned to protect the outer colonies. He was a large man with a thick beard and tired eyes. At 63 years old, he had spent his entire adult life pretending to be weak. He was very tired of pretending. The Persistent was officially classified as a light patrol ship. It had 4 small guns and shields that could barely stop a meteorite. On paper, it was exactly the kind of harmless vessel the Conquered allowed humanity to operate. In reality, it carried a hidden communication array that could reach Earth in seconds. It also carried a single phrase that had memorized 20 years ago when he was first given this command. A phrase he was only allowed to use once. The distress signal came at 3:47 hours, ship time. Commander, his communications officer said, her voice tight with fear. "We are receiving an emergency broadcast from Colony 7. Warships have entered the system. They are attacking the settlement." Felt his blood turn cold. They were one of the founding species of the Conquered. They were tall, reptilian creatures with 4 arms and scales the color of dried blood. They were known throughout the galaxy for their cruelty. "How many ships?" he asked. 40, sir, heavy cruisers and destroyers." The officer paused. "They are rounding up the colonists. 6,000 people, Commander. They say the colony violated territorial boundaries. They plan to take everyone to labor camps." Knew what that meant. Labor camps were death sentences. The prisoners would work until they dropped, and then their bodies would be processed for nutrients. It was legal under Conquered law. Humans were considered a lesser species, barely above animals. For 50 years, humanity had swallowed such insults. They had watched their people be taken, killed, and used. They had smiled and bowed and said nothing. "No more." Stood up from his chair. His crew watched him with wide eyes. "Open a secure channel to Earth Strategic Command," he said. "Priority Alpha, authorization code Prometheus." His communications officer went pale. Everyone on the ship knew what that code meant. They had trained for this moment their entire careers, hoping it would never come, knowing that it would. "Sir," she whispered, "are you certain?" Nodded slowly. "Send the message, 2 words, Prometheus Protocol." The message took 3 seconds to reach Earth. The response came back in 4. "Prometheus Protocol confirmed. Authorization granted. Godspeed, Commander." Turned to his helmsman. "Set course for Colony 7, maximum speed." The Persistent jumped to faster-than-light travel and arrived in the 442 VII system 2 hours later. What saw made his jaw tighten with anger. The fleet hung in orbit around the small colony world like vultures circling a dying animal. 40 warships, each one capable of destroying the Persistent with a single shot. On the planet below, the colonists had been gathered into holding areas. Families huddled together in the cold, waiting to be loaded onto transport ships and taken away forever. Opened a communication channel to the flagship. A reptilian face appeared on the screen. The commander was old, his scales from countless battles. His name was, and he had been killing humans for sport since before was born. "A human patrol ship," said, his forked tongue flickering with amusement. "Have you come to watch, little ape? Or perhaps you wish to join your people in the camps?" Kept his voice calm, almost bored. "You have 6 hours to release our people and withdraw from this system. This is not a negotiation." The commander stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he began to laugh. It was an ugly sound like bones breaking. "Little ape," he said, "I have 40 warships. You have 1 patrol boat. What exactly do you think you can do?" Smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "You were not paying attention. I said withdraw. I did not say or else." His laughter died. His yellow eyes narrowed. "You dare threaten me? I have crushed species older than your entire civilization. I have burned worlds for less than this insult." 6 hours, repeated, "starting now." He closed the channel. His crew sat in stunned silence. The helmsman, a young woman named, turned to look at him with something like terror in her eyes. "Commander," she said, "what happens in 6 hours?" Leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. For the first time in decades, he felt at peace. "In 6 hours," he said, "the galaxy is going to learn what happens when you push humanity too far." The hours passed slowly. Furious at the humans' defiance, broadcast the exchange to every ship in the sector. He wanted everyone to hear how he would crush this arrogant creature. He wanted the galaxy to see humanity put in its place once and for all. Thousands of alien vessels received the transmission. Military commanders and merchant captains and government officials all watched, waiting to see the tiny human ship destroyed. But did not run. He did not beg. He simply sat in his chair and waited. When the 6-hour mark passed, powered up his weapons with great satisfaction. He would destroy the human ship first, slowly, making sure the colonists below could watch. Then he would take his prisoners and leave this worthless system forever. "Target the human vessel," he commanded. "Fire on my order." His weapons officer obeyed. The targeting systems locked onto the persistent. 40 warships prepared to fire. And then the sensor officer made a sound that had never heard before. A wet, choking gasp of pure animal terror. "Commander," the officer whispered, "contact emergence, multiple signatures." He looked up from his screen, his yellow eyes wide with fear. "I cannot count them all." Turned to the viewport, and for the first time in his long, violent life, the commander felt true fear. Space itself was tearing open. Where moments before there had been nothing but empty void, thousands of ships were appearing out of nowhere. They did not use jump gates. They did not crawl through hyperspace. They simply stepped through reality itself, like gods walking through a doorway. The Terran First Armada had arrived. And they had brought enough firepower to burn the galaxy, had commanded warships for over 200 years. He had fought in 17 major conflicts. He had burned colonies and crushed rebellions and executed prisoners by the thousands. In all that time, he had never known fear. He knew it now. The human fleet filled his viewport like a wall of steel and fire. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons moved in perfect formation, their hulls bristling with weapons that glowed with strange energy. Carrier ships launched clouds of fighters that moved like swarms of angry insects. Destroyers and cruisers took position with mechanical precision, forming layers of death that stretched across the entire system. And at the center of it all, like a mountain floating in space, was the flagship. The HSS Unconquered was 3 kilometers long. Its hull was covered in armor so thick that it seemed to drink the light around it. Along its sides, written in letters 100 meters tall, were names. Thousands of names. The names of every human colony that had been raided, every ship that had been destroyed, every person who had been taken by the conquered over 50 years of humiliation. This was not just a warship. This was a monument to human suffering, and it had come to collect a debt. His communications officer was babbling numbers that made no sense. 4,000 vessels, Commander. No, 5,000. The count keeps rising. Energy signatures unlike anything in our database. Shield harmonics we have never seen. Weapons systems we cannot identify. Impossible, hissed. The humans have no fleet. Our spies have watched them for decades. They have nothing but patrol boats and cargo ships. Commander, the officer said, his voice breaking, I am telling you what our sensors show. These ships are real. They are here, and they are targeting us. A new signal cut through all frequencies. It overrode encryption as if it did not exist. A human face appeared on every screen in its fleet, and on every ship in the sector that was monitoring the confrontation. Admiral Wei was 67 years old. Her hair was silver, pulled back in a tight knot. Her face was lined with age and hard decisions. She wore a simple uniform with no medals or decorations. She did not need them. The fleet behind her spoke louder than any medal ever could. This is Admiral Wei of the Terran Navy, she said. Her voice was quiet, calm, and utterly without mercy. 50 years ago, your conquered told humanity to know its place. We have spent every day since then learning. She paused, letting her words sink in. We learned how to build ships that can cross the galaxy in hours instead of weeks. We learned how to create weapons that can crack planets. We learned how to hide in the spaces between stars where your sensors cannot reach. Her eyes were cold. Most importantly, we learned patience. The kind of patience that only comes from being treated like animals for half a century. Found his voice. This is a bluff, a trick. Your species cannot have developed this technology in secret. We would have known. Wei almost smiled. Almost. You knew what we wanted you to know. Every primitive ship your spies reported was a prop. Every struggling colony was a performance. We played the role of the beaten dog while we built the hammer that would break your back. She leaned forward. You have 60 seconds to power down your weapons and surrender. Your crews will be taken prisoner and treated humanely. That is more than your species has ever offered ours. Felt his scales flush with rage and fear. He was a conqueror, a predator. He had never surrendered to anyone. You would not dare attack a conquered fleet, he snarled. The full might of 17 species would descend upon your world. You would be exterminated. Perhaps, Wei said, but you will not live to see it. She nodded to someone off-screen. The unconquered fired a single shot, a beam of pure white light that moved faster than any sensor could track. It passed through empty space, missing his flagship by less than a kilometer. Behind his ship, an asteroid the size of a city simply vanished. There was no explosion, no debris. The matter was converted to energy in an instant and scattered across dimensions. One moment there was a rock. The next moment there was nothing but empty space and fading light. 50 seconds, Wei said. Stared at his tactical display. His 40 warships were surrounded by 5,000 human vessels. His weapons, which he had once believed were the most powerful in the sector, now seemed like toys. The energy readings from the human fleet were so high that his sensors could barely process them. He thought of his fleet, his crew, the families waiting for them back home. He thought of his pride. And then he thought of that asteroid, erased from existence by a weapon that should not be possible. Power down weapons, he said quietly. His bridge crew stared at him in shock. Commander, his first officer asked. I said power down weapons, roared. All ships stand down, we surrender. Across the system, 40 warships went dark. Their guns fell silent. Their shields dropped. They hung in space like dead things waiting to be claimed. On the Persistent, Commander watched the surrender with tears in his eyes. Behind him, his crew was cheering, hugging each other, crying with relief and joy. On the planet below, 6,000 colonists looked up at the sky and saw salvation. Admiral Wei nodded with satisfaction. Dispatch recovery teams to the planet. I want every human citizen on a medical ship within 4 hours. She paused. And send a message to the conquered High Command. Tell them the Terran Republic requests an audience with the Grand Assembly. Her communications officer hesitated. What should the message say, Admiral? Wei looked out at her fleet. 5,000 ships, built in secret, crewed by men and women who had waited their entire lives for this moment. Tell them, she said, that humanity is done being patient. The message reached Prime 12 hours later. The High Arbiter read it 3 times, certain there must be some mistake. There was no mistake. The children had grown up. The insects had evolved. The joke was no longer funny. And now the punchline was coming for them all. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. On 1,000 worlds, beings of every species watched the recordings from Colony 7. They saw the fleet surrender. They saw the human armada appear from nowhere. They saw weapons that should not exist erase matter from reality with a single shot. Panic gripped the galactic conquered. Emergency sessions were called. Fleets were mobilized. Intelligence agencies scrambled to understand how they had been fooled for 50 years. The answer was simple and terrifying. Humanity had never been weak. They had simply been waiting. On Prime, the Grand Assembly Chamber was filled to capacity for the first time in centuries. Every species had sent their highest representatives. Every delegation sat in tense silence, watching the empty speaker's platform below. Outside the great windows, visible against the purple sky, the unconquered hung in orbit. Admiral Wei had brought only one ship, but that one ship was enough. Its presence was a constant reminder of the power that waited beyond the atmosphere. High Arbiter Oran sat in his ancient chair at the highest tier of the chamber. His compound eyes were dull, and his mandibles hung loose. In his 300 years of life, he had never felt so old. 50 years ago, he had laughed at a human woman in this very room. He had called her species children. He had told them to know their place. Now that woman was walking down the same ramp, and she was not laughing. Ambassador was 92 years old. Her hair was white, her face lined with age, but her back was straight and her eyes were sharp. She walked slowly, using a cane for support, but there was nothing weak about her. Behind her came a small escort of Terran Marines in powered armor. They carried no weapons. They did not need to. The chamber was utterly silent as reached the speaker's platform. She looked up at the assembled delegates, taking her time, meeting the eyes of species that had mocked and abused her people for half a century. Then she looked at Iran. "You remember me," she said. It was not a question. The High Arbiter's mandibles clicked softly. "I remember. You were the one who accepted our terms. You were the one who led your people into exile." "I was the one who bought us time," corrected. "Every insult, every humiliation, every tribute we paid gave us another year to prepare. You thought you were breaking us. You were sharpening us." Oran leaned forward. "You deceived the entire Conquered. For 50 years you lied to us." "We survived, you said. There is a difference." She reached into her coat and produced a small data crystal. She placed it on the podium before her. "This contains the terms of our new agreement with the Conquered. They are not negotiable." A holographic display activated, projecting the terms for all to see. First, humanity would receive full and equal membership in the Galactic Conquered, not as subjects, not as lesser beings, as equals in every way. Second, all human prisoners currently held by conquered species would be returned immediately. Every labor camp would be opened. Every prison would be emptied. Third, the conquered would pay reparations for 50 years of exploitation. Resources stolen from human colonies would be returned. Families of those killed would receive compensation. Fourth, the restricted zone around human space would be dissolved. Humanity would be free to expand, to trade, to travel wherever they wished. Fifth, any species that harmed a human citizen would answer to the Terran Navy. No exceptions, no appeals, no mercy. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted and screamed in a dozen languages. Some demanded war. Others called for immediate surrender. The noise was deafening. Iran raised all four of his arms, and slowly, painfully, the chamber fell quiet. "These terms are unacceptable," he said. "You ask us to surrender our authority, to admit that we were wrong, to bow before a species that was nothing but vermin 50 years ago." Smiled. It was the same smile she had worn when she walked out of this chamber half a century ago, the smile that her aide had glimpsed but not understood. "I am not asking," she said. She turned to address the full assembly. "You looked at us and saw primitives. You saw a young species with crude ships and simple weapons, and you thought you could crush us. You thought you could take our people and use them as slaves. You thought you could laugh at us, mock us, treat us like animals." Her voice grew harder. "You made a terrible mistake." She pointed toward the windows, toward the unconquered hanging in the sky like a sword waiting to fall. "You forgot where we came from. Humanity did not evolve in paradise. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day. Ice ages, plagues, predators, wars. We fought for every single day of our existence. We clawed our way up from nothing, built civilizations, destroyed them and built them again." Her eyes blazed. "Did you really think you could threaten a species that survived its own extinction 100 times over?" The chamber was silent. Every alien eye was fixed on the small, old human woman who stood before them without fear. "We could destroy you," said quietly. "We have the ships, we have the weapons. We could burn every world in the Conquered and leave nothing but ashes and memories." She paused. "But that is not who we are. We are not conquerors. We are not monsters. We are simply a people who want to live in peace as equals without fear." She looked at Iran. Accept our terms and we will be your partners. We will share our technology. We will help you solve problems that have plagued your species for. We will be the best friends the conquered has ever known. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire chamber. Refuse, and we will be the worst enemy you have ever faced. The choice is yours. Oran sat in silence for a long moment. He looked at the human woman below. He looked at the warship outside the windows. He looked at the faces of his fellow arbiters and saw only fear. 50 years ago, he had called humanity children. He had told them to be grateful they were allowed to exist. Now those children held the power to end his civilization. The conquered, he said slowly, accepts humanity's terms. Nodded, she did not celebrate, she did not gloat. She simply picked up her cane and turned to leave. Ambassador, Iran called out. She stopped. 50 years ago, the High Arbiter said, I asked you what you had to say in your defense. You said you came in peace. His mandibles clicked. Was that also a lie? Looked over her shoulder. No, she said, we did come in peace. You were the ones who chose war. She smiled one last time. We simply finished it. She walked out of the chamber, her marines falling into step behind her. The Grand Assembly sat in stunned silence. The galaxy had changed forever. 10 years had passed since the day the galaxy changed. The conquered had kept its word. Human prisoners were returned from labor camps across 100 worlds. Reparations flowed into human colonies, rebuilding what had been taken. The restricted zones were dissolved, and human ships now traveled freely among the stars. More importantly, the killing had stopped. No more raids on human settlements. No more kidnappings. No more casual cruelties inflicted on a species the galaxy had once considered beneath notice. Fear was a powerful teacher. But something unexpected had happened in those 10 years. Something no one had predicted. The elder species of the conquered had expected humanity to be cruel rulers. They had expected revenge, punishment, destruction. They had braced themselves for the iron fist they believed was coming. Instead, they found an open hand. Humanity shared its technology freely. The new propulsion systems that allowed ships to cross the galaxy in hours were given to any species that asked. Medical advances that extended life and cured ancient diseases were distributed without charge. Agricultural techniques that could feed billions were taught to worlds that had known famine for centuries. When asked why they were being so generous, the human response was always the same: because we remember what it was like to need help and receive none. They were the most changed of all. The commander who had surrendered at Colony 7 was tried by his own people for war crimes. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He expected execution. Instead, the humans argued for mercy. Admiral Wei herself that the commander had saved lives by surrendering when he did. She asked that he be given a chance to prove he could be better. He was sentenced to community service. For 5 years, he worked in human refugee camps, helping rebuild the lives his species had destroyed. At first, he worked in silence, filled with shame and anger. But slowly, something changed. He began to understand. These humans were not weak. They had never been weak. They had simply chosen to be kind, even to those who had hurt them. It was the greatest strength had ever witnessed. When his sentence ended, he did not return to the military. He became an ambassador instead, working to build bridges between his people and the species they had once tormented. He was not alone. Across the galaxy, former enemies were becoming allies. Not because they were forced to. Because they chose to. Admiral Wei retired 3 years after the confrontation at Prime. She had spent her entire life preparing for war, and now that the war was won, she found she had no appetite for politics or fame. She wanted only peace. She settled on a small colony world far from Earth, a place with green hills and quiet forests and skis that reminded her of home. She built a house with her own hands and spent her days reading, gardening, and watching the stars. Visitors came often, young officers seeking advice, politicians wanting her endorsement, historians wanting to record her memories. She welcomed them all, but she always sent them away with the same message. "The war is over," she would say. "Now we have to win the peace. That is harder than any battle." One evening, a young lieutenant came to see her. He was fresh from the academy, eager and idealistic, full of questions about the great victory. "Admiral," he asked, "what was humanity's greatest weapon? Was it the ships, the technology, the soldiers?" Wei was sitting on her porch, watching the sun set over the hills. She smiled at the question. "Our greatest weapon," she said, "is that we remember." The young lieutenant frowned. "Remember what?" "Everything." Wei turned to look at him. "Every slight, every insult, every friend we lost while we pretended to be weak. We remember it all and we use it to build. The conquered thought 50 years was nothing, a blink of an eye to species that live for centuries, but we used every single day, every hour, every moment." She looked back at the sunset. The elder species ruled because they were first. They had power because they took it from others, but we earned our place. We crawled up from nothing, through suffering and pain and loss, and we never stopped climbing. She paused. "That is the difference between us and them." "What difference?" the lieutenant asked. Wei smiled. "They conquered, we endured, and in the end endurance always wins." The lieutenant left that night with much to think about. Years later, when he became an admiral himself, he would remember that conversation. He would tell the story to his own officers, and they would tell it to theirs. The story of how humanity was mocked, and how humanity answered. Far across the galaxy on Prime, a new monument stood in the plaza before the Grand Assembly Chamber. It had been built by human hands, using human stone, but it belonged to everyone. The monument showed two figures standing side by side. One was human, one was alien. They were looking up at the stars together, their hands almost touching. At the base of the monument, words were carved in every language of the conquered. "We came in peace. We were met with scorn. We answered with strength. Now let us build a future together, not as masters and servants, but as equals. Let us remember the past so that we never repeat it. Let us reach for the stars not as conquerors, but as explorers. Let us be better than those who came before." Below those words, in smaller letters, was a single phrase that had become humanity's motto. "We remember, we endure, we rise." In orbit above the purple world, ships from 100 species moved in peaceful formation. Human vessels flew alongside cruisers and conquered carriers. They were heading out into the unknown together, seeking new worlds, new discoveries, new possibilities. The age of fear was over. The age of partnership had begun. And somewhere in a small house on a quiet colony world, an old admiral watched the stars and smiled. Humanity had been mocked. Humanity had waited. Humanity had risen. And now, at last, humanity was home among the stars.